I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Ziba Ardalan. She's the founder, director, and curator of Parasol Unit Foundation for Contemporary Art, an education charity and a nonprofit for exhibition space in London, established in 2004, with which I'm sure many of you are already familiar. A graduate from the history of art from Columbia University, Ardalan worked as a guest curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art and went on to become the first director-curator of the city's Swiss Institute. At Parasol Unit, she has curated and overseen 50 exhibitions. Before moving to London and founding the Parasol Unit, she was based in Zurich, Switzerland, where she lectured on art and worked as an art advisor. Prior to her career in art, which is quite fascinating, she obtained a PhD in physical chemistry. So I would like to welcome Ziba Ardalan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much, above all, Christina. You have undertaken such amazing project in Engadine and now here, and it requires a lot of vision and bringing everybody together, getting everybody enthusiastic. So I feel extremely honored to be here and to address such a distinguished audience, and to be also with such amazing, wonderful group of panelists here. Mr. Caruso, who is from East London, of course, and we are kind of neighbor because Parasol is there. And also, of course, Chris Dercon. We were 7, 8, or 10 years ago on a panel for judge here in Basel, and it's again wonderful to be back here again in Basel together. So all is really my honor, and I'm thrilled to be talking to you. Parasol, yes. Parasol Unit is the foundation I started, or I had the good fortune to start it in 2004, at the time of London being a glorious time. I always think about it as a golden age of contemporary art. And really a lot of credit goes to Nick Sirota, who just managed single-handedly, basically, creating this remarkable environment, because London, as we all know, has always been extraordinarily active in art, but maybe not that much in contemporary art. And somehow, single-handedly, Nick Sirota brought whatever was New York to London, and even surpassed many, many of other contemporary art places. So the topic of my talk here is basically imagination, creation, and transformation. I am a believer of human being, in what is inside each of us. Wealth, fame, nothing has really impressed me in life. And I believe each of us, every human being, has so much in him or her. And that is really what I am interested. And that is why I started Parasol Unit, basically. Now, Parasol Unit, you see it here outside. It is in the post-industrial area of London. Basically, it was a furniture factory, Victorian furniture factory. It's nothing special about the architecture. Actually, the most extraordinary thing about it is that it's so flexible. And you always, by walking around there, you see the spirit of people, the workers who have been there working. And each time I invite an artist, they are just very happy to show there. They love it. They kind of connect with that area. There is this kind of spirit of working people. So I am always addressing myself. I am a working woman. I'm addressing working people. This is outside. We have a little garden. This was the trees and plants there were belonging to an exhibition of Yutaka Zane we did in 2007. And when the exhibition was finished, we planted everything in a garden. We have a little pond, which is gorgeous. And from outside, on the street side, you have that typical post-industrial place in Hackney. This is the Darren Allman exhibition. And so now I would like, before talking really more details about Parasol Unit, to a little bit talk about the private museums. We are here to talk about private museums. And of course, over the past few years, there has been quite a number of private museums are happening. Why is it happening? Of course, because there is a lot of wealth created. Is there a future for private museums? And is legacy possible? Now, thinking about so much private museums happening, we are considering this a novelty, when actually in reality, private museum started 2,500 years ago, even maybe before. And in fact, in reality, museums as institutions are much younger phenomenon. So it all shows how the social responsibility is, and the question of social responsibility, the discussion about the social responsibility, the museum as institution, as public institution, has become so much part of our existence that in a way we think they are like school, like universities, and every single citizen of the world has a right to them. And that is how we think, when in reality, they are newer phenomenon, much newer phenomenon. When I think about that, this whole issue and discussion about private museum and public institutions, I recall an interesting panel discussion at the Whitney Museum at the beginning of 90s. And one of the panelists, one of the speakers, was the great art critic and philosopher called Arthur Danto. He mentioned the art museum as institution is only 200 years old. That's in the early 90s, of course. There is no reason why it has to go on forever. It is not like a hospital, after all. Which is true, absolutely. And Danto's comments actually resonate with all the discussion of today, social responsibility, private museum versus public museum, and the whole conversation which is surrounding it, and we are all conscious about it, of course. And aside from social responsibility, I believe that private museums are great undertaking. It's very generous, as long as they can serve the public. And we have three of glorious ones here, the Schaulager, the Baylor Museum, and as well as Tangley Museums. They are all private institutions and are all serving the public, which is just wonderful. Now, going back a little bit, the history of private museums, we are all focused on China, and let's take a look at China. In 2006, there were more than 1,500 museums in China. In 2016, 10 years later, there has been many, many more museums in China, 4,100, and nearly 1,000 of them private. Quite interesting. In 1949, when the Communist Party took over, there were only 25 museums in China. Other places of the world, if you have a quick look, United States of America in 2014 had over 35,000 museums. United Kingdom, 2,500 museums in 2016, of which 1,600 were private. In Germany, a bit more, 6,712 museums, of them almost 3,000 private. And because we are in the lovely Switzerland, which has been always in the forefront of museum world and collecting, Switzerland in 2016 had 1,108 institution museums, and private museums are the majority. Actually, there are 70% of museums are private. And the four last institutions which opened since 1992, they were all privately financed at its inception, including the Paul Klee Foundation in Bern. So these are quite remarkable numbers, remarkable thing to think about, how private museums are slowly taking over. And with the amount of wealth created in our world in 21st century, it just probably keeps going up. Now, the future of private museum. In creating private museum, each of us take our social responsibility differently. Should this institution exist forever, or should they exist for as long as we feel it is important? I am personally the believer of the second situation, of the further one, and I believe institutions have to exist as long as we feel like it, and after that, basically, we hopefully have inspired somebody enough, and that they do their own way of doing something good for the society in whichever way they want. So it is maybe a little bit iconoclastic way of thinking, but that is how I believe. Now, such differences have also existed in the past. It's not anything new. It's not something I have invented or somebody else has invented. If you go to the recent past, we look at the Frick and Barnes, for example, in US that everybody knows, Reinhardt collection in Switzerland, a fabulous, beautiful museum in Winterthur. And in 1965, the Basel family brought a whole group of people in Zurich together, and they acquired the wonderful collection of Alberto Giacometti's work, which is now housed in Kunsthaus. So this is, again, another alternative, having a small museum within a publicly funded institution. So this kind of variation have always existed, basically. And recently, we heard, that was wonderful news, that the Chinese contemporary art is going to continue to exist thanks to the kind of, I don't know, call it merger, rather we say it's a kind of combination, collaboration of the youth collection and LACMA. So this is how people think. People think about the legacy, and some people think about the heritage. I am personally not very much in terms of legacy. I believe we should live the moment. We are so lucky to be where we are, and we create a forum and institution as a forum for discussion, challenge, conversation, and hopefully build a whole new generation of very smart, even smarter young people than our generation was, and that continues. So basically, that's where we come to Parasol. Parasol was built out of love, respect for artists, for art, and wanting also to give something back to the society. And it's all the ideas, as I said earlier, contrary to the idea of legacy. Legacy, for me, it's not important, and it is just as important for maybe just if you are Cyrus the Great or probably Einstein, your name will continue. But to be honest, I've seen so much in my long life, which is one of the greatest things that has happened to me, that in a way, the day you go, you just don't have no control of your life. Well, all that really has helped me because I was fortunate enough to obtain a PhD in quantum mechanics before starting art. And I realized one day when, as a child, I started looking at the molecule of water, and it was told to me it was made of 2 atoms of hydrogen with 1 oxygen glued together, and they exist, and they will always be that way walking around the world. And then the quantum mechanic told me that there is nothing like that. Actually, we are all energy. All of us are energy, and nothing is forever. Sometimes these wonderful energy waves, they come together, they create something, and then, we are gone again, we are dispersed totally. So let's enjoy the moment. And of course, that was awakening in me. It was quite special. And as some of you might know also that I am Persian. I lived a life in a feudal society. My upbringing with a very old traditional family of 13th century, and then all of a sudden, 1979, the revolution happened. And that taught me a huge amount that nothing is forever. I have now family from Australia to Los Angeles, and we are all a little bit, I don't know how to say, maybe a little bit lost in the world. We are in exile, all of us, and but it's amazing that the Iranian people, Iranian population outside of the country have never been as active, have never been that extraordinary. Even those in Iran, incredible films and contemporary art in Iran is very active. And so I believe there is this amazing amount of energy in human being. And personally, I am absolutely have no attachment to objects. What I'm attached to is the intellect in every single one of us. And we have to be proud of that. So yes, that was already said about me and where I come from. Basically, Parasol doesn't have a collection at all. But then there are other museums, the Aspen Art Museum, Contemporary Art Museum in Houston. They are there. I had a very democratic upbringing, thanks to a very intelligent mother. And I miss, of course, and the benefit of having studying science and revolution, all that really helped me to realize that how life is, and we have to be challenging each other. We have to be thinking and bringing our energy for future discussions and see what will happen. Anyhow, the future generation is extremely important to me. Some of the exhibition, Sia Armajani, 2013, delighted to say that Sia Armajani, great artist coming from philosophy, was a great artist, and he is still a great artist. In the 80s and 90s, his name was everywhere. He even did the Calderon at the Atlanta's Olympic Games. And we had this beautiful show. This is just one part of it, 85 models of bridges. And he's going to have an extraordinary retrospective at the Walker Arts Center, and then later on is going to the Met Breuer. Delighted about it. A very young artist, Julien Charrière, a Swiss artist. We showed him very early on in his career. And so the mission of Parasol Unit, what is the mission of Parasol Unit? For us, it is just like when I think about it, is imagine, create, and transform, hopefully, in the best possible way. Basically, it's a Kunsthalle model, run very economically, 8 staff. You have quite an ambitious program, 4 exhibitions a year. The space is not huge, 500 square meter. We do publication usually, which I love. That's an important part. And through our education program, basically we connect with the community. Exhibition program is extremely international, but the education program really brings us back to the Hackney community. And staff, very young staff, well-trained and extremely given responsibility. Some of the artists we have shown, 2005, Michael Borman, Young Fudon, 2006, and Julien Charrière, Robert Therion, the first 20 years of his work, which was amazing and totally forgotten. Martin Perrier, Lisa Meroy, because really performance is so much embedded in her art. And of course, in the September 2018, just in a few months, we have a wonderful exhibition of Heidi Bucher, a Swiss artist, her time really has come, and we are going to focus on her skinning pieces, on the latex pieces that she did. And Heidi Bucher also has created, in the early part of her career, amazing line drawings and collages, cell collages. and those need, of course, to be taken by another institution and to be shown, and because she really deserves an incredible attention. Anyhow, I hope you will come to the Frieze Art Fair or for the opening, and we see you. And these are some of these exhibitions. Young Fudon, we commissioned this wonderful 7-channel, which you see only 4 here, of No Snow and the Broken Bridge. And really, it wasn't important at all that we put our name on it. And as it is not on the name of the foundation at all, basically, collectors of this work, they even don't know that Parasol actually was the commissioner of this fabulous work. Julian Charrière, Robert Therrien, Martin Perrier, Leza Miroy, as I said, and now in 2019 we are going to get even more ambitious for my level, because I'm just one person doing all this. And 2019 we are going to do an exhibition. The spark is you, and we want you there to come and see it. It will be an exhibition, a group exhibition of Persian artists, contemporary Persian artists, taking place simultaneously in Venice and in London. The idea came out of Goethe's 2019, which will have the 200 years anniversary of Ost-Westliche Divan, in homage to Hafez. The whole idea came also because of the recent things happening. So that's a kind of program Parasol can do. It's an art exhibition, but it's truly is about respect for other cultures, something that our leaders have forgotten these days. And it is important. It is a Persian art exhibition, but the message goes beyond it, to have tolerance, respect for other culture and people. Anyhow, I would love to have you on the 8th of May to come to the opening if you are in Venice. And thank you very, very much for listening to my little story.
You're not done quite yet.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Very invigorating and dynamic. I appreciated not only that we got to learn more about Parasol Unit, but also this kind of introduction to the worldwide expansion of museums. So you brought a lot of kind of information, but also strong convictions about the role of these institutions. So maybe first we see if there are questions from any of you. I'm sure there are, yeah.
Well, Ziba, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I want to make a comment on Danto's saying that you cited. Museums maybe will not exist forever because they are not hospitals. Now, I think museums are like hospitals.
Beautiful.
I think art is a very important orientation in today's world, in today's fast-changing world. And it gives freedom of imagination, possibilities to change the world, as you also mentioned. So art, to a certain extent, is like schooling, like kindergarten, like primary school, like universities. And the infrastructure of art museums is like the railroad, or like the road network in a country. And therefore, I think art is a public task. I mean, I don't want to say anything against a private museum, and I love private museums, it's fantastic, but the main responsibility, I think, should be taken on by the state. And therefore, I hope that the museum will last forever. Well, that's just my comment. I could expand. I don't want to expand too much. But that's my reaction to Danto's saying. Thank you.
Well, of course, Danto had this extraordinary ability to put words and sentences and to kind of irritate, to kind of destabilize, and that made for a lot of discussion. I agree with you 100%. In a way, I have given my life, my expertise for now 15 years soon. At Parasol, I believe in the act that, in a way, art has to exist. Now, whether our governments will be able in future really to follow up that, that's quite special, and that's why private museums, the role of them is going to be important, because I think that with health issue, infrastructure issue, governments are going to be busy doing other things. And there is always less. And we know in England, Mr. Caruso can say, there has been quite a lot of cuts in funding for culture. So that is where the role of private people and our responsibility, if we are able to support art financially, we should really do it.
Well, you also mentioned that the majority of museums are private museums. I would now state the thesis that the most important museums in the world are public museums. You know, there are many private museums.
Yes.
And the founders of private museums, they think in years and decades.
Yes.
But the public museums thinks in centuries.
Centuries, yes.
So there's a big difference.
Yes.
And the museum is also a memory of culture for the public, and has an overall responsibility, whereas the private museum always picks 2 or 3 things he likes or it likes, and then the rest is omitted.
I absolutely agree with you. But Thomas, we have known each other over 40 years, and we can still converse about.
I would like to follow up with this question, and then we still have time maybe for one other, but do we also need to be concerned, these graphs and these statistics that show the kind of relative rise of private museums, do we also need to think about the kind of possibility that the profusion of private museums also becomes a kind of then a reason whereby the state argues that there's less funding needed for these public cultural institutions because the private sort of sector has now fulfilled this role. So this is a very critical discussion, I think, too.
This is an excellent question, and that is the social responsibility of private museums, and we see that in a long run, as Thomas was also mentioning, finally a lot of collection or private museums are offered to the government or to publicly supported institution, and it becomes even a bigger burden for publicly supported institution and for governments. So where is the stop? But I still feel, frankly, when you come to Basel, your life, your experience of art is so amazingly highlighted by going to Schaulauger, by going to the Baylor Museum. And just fabulous to be able, they are really taken over that social responsibilities and presenting great art to us. I just hope that even if we do not exist, we give examples to the future generation to support art and somehow to continue the idea of private museums. I just feel very responsible for future.
I just wanted, I totally agree with what you said. And I don't think it's a matter of the state being able. It's about the state being willing. And if you take Britain as an example, art funding is minuscule compared to almost every other department of funding that the government undertakes. And it's completely because they think they can cut the arts funding that they do. And it's been proven time and time again in Britain, where fine arts education and also the museum sector are quite robust and quite innovative as well, that every pound that you spend in cultural subsidy brings back £5, which is not the case with defense spending, for instance. Defense spending costs a lot, you don't get anything back. And so it's really about what they're willing to do. And of course, I completely agree with what you're saying. In Parasol, I go, it's one of my local art spaces, so I go there. I've seen almost every show. And it functions really like a public space. It's incredibly accessible. But despite the progress that's been made in public and private art institutions, it's still only a tiny segment of populations all over the world that enjoy and benefit from seeing art shows. I mean, there's been statistics done recently in Western Europe and in North America, and it's something like 95% of museum visitors are white people of European origin, you know, and that isn't the general makeup of the population. So there's a lot of work to be done because there's a lot of people who are not benefiting from the incredible empowerment that arts generally, but I also think the visual arts specifically, because you don't need to read about them. If you have the confidence to go to a show and you've been taken to a show as a kid, it's such a pleasure and so much energy that you can get from it. And that's clearly your motivation for making your shows.
It certainly is my motivation. And we have, for example, educational program. Well, I have a budget £1.6 million a year, which is very small for the program we have. Our education program, one of the strands is children who are up to 5, whatever, 1 to 5 or 2 to 5, and they are mostly hugely subscribed and waiting lists on them because the area we are in Hackney, there is basically not much going on. And then yet you read those incredible reports by psychologists at how important it is, art, experience of life during the first few years. And we have to do much more of them. But of course, we are just a tiny little atom in the cultural life of London. Yeah.
It's an excellent discussion. We need to move on to the next speaker, but I think it's a perfect segue. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you.